Hey everyone, it's Alan here from the Rookies. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're tuning in from. Just wanted to say a big hi to everyone and just let everyone know what this session is about. We're fortunate enough to have James Brady, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, give some feedback to the game design and development sort of level people on the Rookies platform, which is fantastic. He's offering up his time to be able to help you people, to help yourselves to improve your work, improve your portfolios. And the way that we're going to run this session is really like an industry daily session. So he selected out some random projects that are on the Rookies platform, and he's got 30 minutes where he's going to come in and basically act like an art director. And it's just going to be short, sharp information, and hopefully, you'll be able to take that information and be able to tweak your work and make some improvements. We figure at this point, because these are rookies that are the user level that we've selected, and hopefully now you're at that point where you're building out your portfolio, you've got all your pieces, you're starting to apply for work, and also at contenders as well, because you're kind of at that stage. But we want to start introducing you to some of these industry practices. We've found in the past that a lot of people get really sensitive about getting feedback and take it personally. You have to understand that that's not how you need to. You need to be able to, be able to adapt and know that it's not a personal attack on your work. This is just industry professionals that are at their top of their game, and the feedback that they're giving will hopefully make your work a lot better. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce James. I'm going to bring him on now. And James Brady, how are you, sir?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Hey, thank you so much for coming onto this feedback session and offering up your time to be able to help with rookies that are on the platform. James, just to kickstart this off, I'd love if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're currently working, your history, and maybe even just show us some of the work that or not show us, but just show us some of the stuff that you've done in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, I'm a senior environment artist with Antimatter Games. I'm a contract environment artist with Alphonic in the US. And I'm also a freelance artist with Eyes Out, a new studio in the US, founded by Robin Fink, the guitar player from Nine Inch Nails, and Corey, who's behind Condemned Fear and Spec Ops The Line. And currently just reside in Ireland, working remotely, freelance. I've been freelancing here for the last, I'd say 4 years. 2 of those years I've actually only been in a studio. Other companies include Art Buddy Productions, Techland, Liquid Development, Rockstar Games, New World Interactive, Creative Assembly, Ghost Story Games, Next Gen Dreams 3D. Yeah, there's been a lot. And yeah, I can also, if you want, I can also show off some of the work on my website as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, I think people would appreciate just to see some of the stuff that you've done. That would be awesome if you can. Let's just bring that up. Sorry, mate. I'm a bit slow this morning.
It's all good. So this is my website. I got some personal work which I've done in the past, just like on Minecart. I render everything in Marmoset Toolbag, texture it in Substance Painter, use 3ds Max and ZBrush as my primary modeling tools. Just got a World War II knife here, all the same kind of workflow. Textures for like a RPG and then like the rocket. And just like some organic stuff I've done in ZBrush. Done a little bit of Marvelous Designer, but I still have a ton that I need to learn on that. I mean, this stuff here, it still holds up, but it's relatively old to where my quality bar is now. And just we got a military pouch here as well. Got like a landmine, kind of just riffing off some of the Call of Duty inspiration for this kind of realism. And we got some high poly stuff. So we got like a knife, military knife, high poly for the glove, high poly for the mine, World War II knife, and then the mine cart. And again, all this stuff is just rendered in ZBrush, or not ZBrush, sorry, Marmoset. Yeah. And then just some of the projects I worked on, a lot of the stuff's still under NDA. So we got like Dying Light 2, can't be shown. I got Hitman 2. I made a high poly barber, which I believe is featured in a map in India where you have to like assassinate a guy in the barber chair. So that was pretty sweet to see that. Worked on Halo Infinite with Liquid Development and part of the 3D art team, of course under strict NDA. And Firewall Zero Hour worked with Liquid Development doing weapon textures for this. Character art with Art Bully Productions, a Rogue company. When I was an art lead at Art Bully, was managing teams on both Rogue Company and Smite with Hi-Res, and then touched down on Call of Duty before moving on. And then when I was an artist at Rockstar, working on Red Dead Redemption 2, did a little bit for Inline Games on the Forest. Funny enough, I made all this stuff and I was wondering why I was making all like furniture stuff, because you wouldn't see this in the game, but then I realized that they were actually working on an alternative ending and thankfully had all this stuff on show. Made the little cog that appears whenever you're combining items, which was really sweet. And just, I mean, this stuff goes way back to like 2017, just stuff I did for PUBG during my time with them. Just assets for the Miramar Desert map.
And yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I worked on another indie game called Ground Branch, just done some props. Like, the further we go down here, basically, like, the older the work gets. So I kind of, like, push it down when I work on new stuff.
and the less you want to show it.
Yeah, that's it. It's like, I don't want them to see this first.
Oh,
and then just, like, a bunch of the studios I worked with. So was with Ghost Story, Rockstar, Creative Assembly, did some freelance for We Do Workshop, worked with like development, Fox 3D and Outsourcing Studio and Hitman, just many more. Senior environment artist and Virtuos, art lead at Art Bully. Yeah, it's been quite an interesting 6.5 years. Worked with Platige on some cinematic stuff, and then Techland was on Untitled 2, and then just a bunch of the games and stuff I worked on.
Wow.
Testimonials and just some like interview and publications, like things I've done with 3D World Magazine, 3D Artist Magazine, Imagine FX, just some interviews and stuff that you can find online on YouTube and Spotify as well. So I've only worked, I made props. I'd say the closest I got to film was probably with Platige, doing some like cinematic stuff, which was like high poly art, it wasn't really like game ready, but never done any like character stuff. I don't ever work at each company, so it really depends. I mean, it's because it's freelance. It's kind of it depends kind of how long they need my support. So it could be a month to 6 months to 3 months. It just depends. And I usually work with 2 or 3 studios at a time, which is kind of, I suppose, the way I've been able to kind of ramp up on all these projects and stuff. Is kind of just, I kind of schedule out my day to day and just bounce between 3 clients. At the moment,
and
it's interesting.
I was just going to say, and they're totally cool with you having, like being able to work with other studios at the same time?
Yeah, for me, it's because, I mean, it's weird because when I do this, a day never feels like work. And I suppose I'm so used to being in front of the computer for 15, 16 hours a day. So it honestly, it's not as hard as people may think. I'd be working with Antimatter and then evening jump on Telephonic and then jump from that to the 9 Inch Nails gig. And yeah, it's just, honestly, I say the hardest part is just trying to keep the creative juices flowing for quite a long time. That can be the trickiest part, and the concentration.
Cool. Hey, I just got a quick question there while we're talking about freelance. I was going to keep the questions till the end, but you know what? This is kind of where what we're talking about now. No plastic, just us. How, also has lockdown affected the way you work or any fallbacks? Like, has it changed, I guess? And also, how long have you worked for each of the companies? Are they really short gigs? To give us some details about that.
Sure. So the whole lockdown situation with COVID, weirdly enough, didn't affect me at all because I was remote for freelance for 2 years. So when kind of the whole pandemic hit and all the countries are going into lockdown and workplaces were going to be in fully remote, nothing changed for me, which was a very weird situation when I was watching all my friends kind of transition into working from home, and I've been doing it for quite a while. I think honestly, the pandemic has actually opened way more doors. A lot of these companies that I worked with probably wouldn't have considered remote talent before COVID hit, but now that the pandemic has happened, they're definitely open to it. Like, for example, I don't think ArtBully would have been open to it. I know Antimatter weren't prior to the pandemic, and yeah, I mean, probably even Dionite too. Like, there's probably been a lot of projects I've worked on that I probably wouldn't have had the chance, given the pandemic. And for each like project, it depends on how long the client needs me. So, for instance, I was with ArtBully for about 6 months. Techland about 8 months. It really just depends how much they need that support. I was with Ghost Story for about 2 years, and there was a bunch of other clients. Just again, it really depends on kind of the requirements.
I'm curious. I mean, I know that you're obviously not entry level or a junior, but if somebody, I'm just thinking about rookies that are now starting to look for jobs and having to do this sort of remote setup in terms of like training somebody that's because when typically you would go to a studio, there would be a set amount of time set aside for a week or two where that person would get trained up in the tools and work processes and all the rest of it. For somebody that's applying now, how does that work now? Like, is there still a training sessions or period that happens online, or are they not hiring young people so much because they're looking for more experienced people and not having to deal with that?
Not necessarily, no. I honestly, I think, given the right tools and processes that a studio may have, it's actually very easy to onboard someone remote. Studios are definitely open to that remote talent, regardless of the level of experience. I mean, the more junior you are, then probably higher chances with indie studios. And as those years go on and the doors open with more AAA studios, and even as a solo freelancer, every studio you'll work for will always have an onboarding time, because the tools and pipeline and processes that each studio use differ from studio to studio. So you could join Studio A and then move on to Studio B, but you will be given X amount of time to ramp up and learn the way they do things and become familiar with it. And there will always be one-to-one Zoom calls where they would literally go through that with you, do a screen share with you, and be like, okay, this is how we get from A to B with this. Or sometimes they will ask you to do a screen share and then you do the steps and they kind of follow you and they correct you then where you go wrong. A lot of studios would also provide PDF files that give you like a kind of like a guide to kind of use whenever you don't have access to the lead artist, or if someone's busy and they can't assist. And honestly, like a lot of studios do a lot of hand holding when you start to kind of help. But then as the years go on and you become more experienced, for say, like example, working on Unreal Engine 4, you kind of know how to hit the ground running. You don't need as much support. You kind of know where to find things, how to get set up. Kind of, there's a lot of that foundation already there. But no, there definitely is that support. For example, when I joined Ghost Story, I never really did any modular architecture art work ever, and there was a lot of support in onboarding me to learn that and learn how to actually create that for Unreal. Yeah, I mean, that was definitely probably the studio that I grew with the most, because before that I was primarily creating assets, which my website shows a lot, but I'm also now fully experienced and a senior artist in environments as well, which it's probably all under NDA right now, but yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. We said about how long, what was the other? Charlie's got one here, which is, did you have to apply for every job? Or did they come through recommendations? Like, how does that work? Do you just sort of get on a roll,
Yeah, so it's kind of half and half. You sort of, if you build relationship and contacts with people over LinkedIn and just kind of send in your resume and portfolio to different companies, sometimes studios can just reach out to you over email or just reach out over LinkedIn, be like, hey, are you available for work? We need such and such. And then that conversation continues over a Slack or Skype call, and then you sign a contract and you're into the work. But the most part, to really get your name out there and to get yourself noticed, it's the three things I always tell people is to apply for job applications, reach out to people on LinkedIn who work at that company. So like the lead artists or art directors, get them to know your background and where you worked and what you specialize in. And there's also another platform I use, although you have to pay for it. It's called Rocket Reach, and you can search up emails and stuff for art directors and just send them an email and be like, "Hey, sorry, but you just introduce yourself." And you'll find after a while of doing that, because the industry is so small, that word gets around and people know people, and you just end up being a part of a conversation somewhere. Especially when you get testimonials on your website and they can see the people and they're like, oh, I worked with him at X studio, so they can hit them up and be like, hey, what's he like? For example, I had a studio in the US 2 days ago that I reached out to, and I had no idea that I was on their outsourcing list. So like a lot of that stuff can happen. It's just about getting your name out there. I always say to people, you can be the best artist in the world, but if you're not putting yourself out there, no one will know.
Yeah. Hey, one question that I think, like I was guilty as, when I was sort of a junior or coming, first coming onto the scene was, especially when you're freelancing, you're worried about actually, you get that time where you actually get a lot of work in, and you're like, yeah, actually you have to turn work down. But yeah, there's that fear of like, if I turn this project down, these people are going to not, want to use me again. How do you manage that? I guess, when you say you're getting yourself out there, like what's the priority or checklist that you go through to go, okay, cool, I want this job first. I'm going to have to turn this one down, because it's less money or for whatever reasons. But how do you manage that?
Sure. So I do have times where, I'm very luckily always in a position where I'm like, I have to turn down so much work. It's never really been a position where it's like, oh my God, I don't have anything. So how I prioritize that is, well, first pay. Which client is willing to pay you the highest? The project, does it excite you? Is it AAA? Is it indie? Is it something that you would love to have in your resume? And then thirdly, time zone. So it's like, okay, do I want to work for someone in Europe, or am I happy to go and work in US hours? Really, those things kind of come down to it. Like for me, it's really, I contradict myself saying this, but it's become more important as time went on, which is getting a work-life balance, which is not really accurate right now. But for me, it's like, okay, well, what is your day to day? What is important to you in that day? And what can you work around that schedule? So if you're like, hey, I want to do this in the morning and I want to do that in the morning, and you don't want to start work at 9, then that gives you the option of, okay, well, then I can accept this job in the US and sync up with them around 2 p.m. and work from 2 p.m. to 10 or 11. Yeah, that's really how I do it, is kind of, and then another thing is, have you worked with these people before? Have you worked with any of the people they have in the studio? What's your relationship like with them? And sometimes you can honestly just tell from communicating with them and getting that feeling that you get that gut feeling of like, okay, this will be very exciting to work on, or okay, I feel like this is not going to go well. And in time, that develops and you get better at kind of knowing what your own strengths and weaknesses are, and kind of knowing like what you enjoy doing and what you don't enjoy doing, and just trying to keep yourself on that kind of path so you don't end up pigeonholing yourself into doing like 3 clients of like things you hate.
Yeah, no, get it. And this is sort of turned back into a bit of a Q&A session, but I'm even curious myself, right? Because I'm not from games, and I know we get a lot of common questions from recent grads or students that are trying to break into the industry. One other question, when you talked about money and, you look for the person, or, look for the client that possibly pays, is willing to pay you the most. If you were to, you look at yourself as a person coming into that sort of freelance work as a junior person, you're always fearful of asking for a lot of money because you might lose out on the job. There's that whole cat and mouse thing that happens if, and a lot of, and myself included, a lot of people are guilty of like underselling themselves. What advice would you give to, people that are trying to get onto that freelance scene, or, even this remote working experience that's going on now? How do you benchmark yourself against your value and what you're worth? How do you, what are you worth? How do you do that?
Sure. So I've learned this over time. When I started freelancing, I was definitely guilty of undercharging myself. And I think it was very much down to the, oh my God, I want to work on this. I don't want to lose that opportunity. So you sell yourself short. I think everyone does that at the start, which is extremely foolish, especially if you come out of industry to go freelance. The three things I would say in terms of valuing is, are you using your own equipment and software? If you are, charge higher. Or do you have experience? Can you create what they're looking for? Can you hit it even at like a mid-entry kind of level, even if it's not like senior? Charge more. Honestly, like I don't think there's a lot of exposure on daily and hourly rates in the industry, and I think that leaves a lot of people blind to, okay, what should I charge? How much should I approach this person for? But the one thing I always say is, if you're not sure and you're not sure what their budget is, ask them what their budget is. Don't say anything on your end and just play off that. You might get surprised. They might be willing to pay you way more than you ever thought you'd get, and then just accept it.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's so, and it's so shit, to be honest, to be frank, when you're a young person trying to get into the industry and there's no resource or nowhere to go, okay, well, here's the base salary that I need to be asking for, base hourly rate or whatever it is. It's just the Wild West. And I think, hopefully, with some of the stuff that we've got coming out this year, it will give people a benchmark of what they should be asking for, because that's across the board. It's not just in games, it's in visual effects and everything else. There's a whole bunch of other questions here from No Plastic. He feels like he's on a bit of a roll, which is awesome. If you don't mind, we'll probably just keep them till the end. We've got James, you've got everything set up with Sync Sketch there, and you've selected out some projects. So I'm going to hand it over to you. We've got, what time is it now? We've probably done our 30 minutes already in terms of just talking, but it's 9 a.m. here in the morning, so in Australia. So we'll go through till 9:30, which will be, you've been online for an hour at that point, but at least you'll have a 30-minute sort of window to be able to give that feedback to these projects that you've selected out, if you're cool with that, obviously.
Awesome.
Okay, awesome. Okay, cool, man. I'm going to just flick you over to Sync Sketch. I'm going to take myself off and let you just run with this. Cool, man. Thank you, James, and we'll talk after you finish the feedback.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, so I picked out some of the examples on the rookies, under the rookies category. Just some of areas I specialize in with asset art and hard surface art and even environment art stuff. So I picked out this crate, and I think as a junior, it's a really good start, because when I look at this, the three things that stand out to me first is A, this person knows how to do UVs. B, they know how to model, and they know how to get a lot of this extra detail in around beveling around the edges and such. And the two things that really stand out to me is, and one thing I learned the hard way, is always make sure the wood grain is flowing the right direction. For example, we see a lot of warping here on these side sections. So I would always say, if you're ever doing wood grain, just make sure it's flowing the same direction, even on different planks, because you would imagine if they were to cut up planks, they'd be cutting it from the same piece of wood, unless it's colored like this. So, for example, the guy has it solid here, where it's just it's correct. So that's the first thing that stood out. The second thing that stood out is I can see in the wooden planks that it's all nicely chamfered, and it's almost like you guys are using weighted normals, like the mid-poly workflow, which can really get you there without having to do the whole high poly to low poly process. But I noticed on the screws and bolts, they're very flat on the top. So I would probably go in and just chamfer these on the top and around the sides, just to give that kind of, just to have the same sort of flow as the rest of the geometry. And then, like, for example, if we jump over here to the wireframe, we can see that, yeah, the guy has used a really good way of doing it, which is the mid-poly workflow. In theory, depending on the platform you're on, you could either probably keep this like this if you wanted to get all that kind of nice extra detail and have the light hitting it. So all these sections of geometry kind of just show whenever the light hits it. But if you were really wanting to like hit it like a game ready asset and just sort of kind of really optimize this, you could probably honestly just have this as a flat sort of like cube side, just mapped, and then bake all this down as high poly detail to a normal map. And then that would basically give you the same result, and you'd be paying for much less geometry. So you'd honestly be paying for like a single quad rather than all of this detail. And again, at the top, if you were to, you could do this two ways. You could either go in, just chamfer those edges to give it more of a flow like this, or you could go in with B, which is just exactly like this section here, and just go in and basically do a high poly pass on it. You have your simple low poly geometry piece, unwrap that, and then just bake a normal map for it. And that's just another approach. But I mean, overall, I definitely think this asset's a really good start, and I think like the detail is really nice. I would say I'd probably just be a bit careful on the kind of wood grain detail, because it seems very noisy. And if you're at a distance looking at this asset, the noise will increase and it will just be very noisy on screen. So I'd probably half that, and the wood grain, and yeah, otherwise a really, really awesome start. And yeah, I look forward to seeing what this guy does next. So the next asset I'm looking at is definitely really kind of on the quality bar of what they would require in either an indie or AAA studio. Like I seen this and I was like, yeah, this is like really high level. I suppose the only thing that kind of stands out to me with this is just I noticed when looking at the wireframe that the planes for a lot of the grass and stuff foliage seems very dense, and I would worry that even if this mesh was a first person asset where the person's like holding it in camera, that this would be too dense, and it would obviously, performance wise it would cost a lot. So I would probably honestly reapproach this section and just like bake this down onto larger cards. So just create like a single set where you have like your detail, bake your normal and alpha for it, and just increase the size of these cards and just do it more like this instead of the other way. Because what this will do then is it'll cheapen up this area for performance and price count and go down. And you'll also be able to use the alpha to kind of mimic a lot of this detail. And the same here as well around the vine. We can see that there's a lot of these individual sections. And again, I think because you can use an alpha map to really save on price count and budget, I would probably go in and just make these flat cards and just literally create another texture where you literally have the high poly meshes of these, and you're just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You bake this down, you bake it down into your normal and your alpha, and then you just map the cards, the larger cards, to this detail, and it'll just help to really crunch down that detail, and not detail, sorry, like the price count. I mean, if this was like a cinematic asset, then it would probably be okay, like honestly. But otherwise, yeah, I would definitely go for that. And then, I mean, overall the detail is really nice, but again, it's just the wireframe that stands out. So if I look at like this top section, there's a lot of edge loops that you could probably get rid of because it still feels very much like a subdivided mesh. So I'd probably strip this middle one. I'd strip the one going up this direction here, and then follow that around here as well. And I mean, depending, if this was a first person view asset, I'd probably keep these chamfers in the corner. If not, I'd probably honestly just weld these and have one single edge run around there. And then the same with these sections down here. You can see here that there's edge loops running in the center, which can be quite wasteful when it comes to trice budget. So I'd literally remove these or weld these, depending on how it's attached to the head or if the head's floating. And then I would do the same with this section, just to really cheapen it up. And honestly, as the quality on this is really there. Like it's awesome. But I think if you implement these feedback notes and you go to show a wireframe in your portfolio, the studio that's reviewing it will be able to see that, okay, he can create high quality art, but B, he also knows how to optimize that art for an engine. And again, the same here. I just get rid of all these center edge loops, because you have to remember, a lot of this detail is going to be in your high poly. So your normal map will always do the heavy lifting when it comes to this stuff. You can keep your geometry cheap, and your high poly will do all the work. And again, with the head, it's really, really nice as well. It feels a lot more optimized, which is really, really nice. And yeah, I guess just as another word of advice, whenever you're creating UV islands, always make sure to keep them flat and straight, because this stops basically any aliasing in your bake. As you know, sometimes in Substance Painter, when you do a normal map bake, you kind of get like this like weird jaggedy edges and stuff. That basically eliminates that. And yeah, this is another awesome, well, basically same guy, but really, really awesome work. I mean, the qualities there, just the stylized, the coloration, just everything, that just reads really, really nice. And even the PBR values read really, really well. Definitely is hitting the quality bar needed to get into the industry. But again, it comes down to the wireframe is the one thing that stands out to me. And it's just, I feel like the topology could be optimized way more, because it just feels very dense. And it does feel like you could literally probably throw a turbo smooth or open sub D modifier on this and it would go high poly straight away. So what I would do again is just go in and just remove edge loops that you don't need, if they don't affect the silhouette, and they don't upset any UV seams, you can totally strip them out, because none of the detail will be missing in that. Like the normal map will have all that detail from the bake. And then just the same here as well. I would just do it again here. I even get rid of these two because they're not changing the silhouette or affecting anything. And then this one here. And if you feel like you get to a point where you're like, okay, there's like 6 edge loops here, and I don't know which ones to remove, just remove every second one. So, keep this one, remove this one, keep this one, remove this one, keep this one. So it just ensures that there is no silhouette adjustment. And then this section here is really nice, and I like that you have this as geometry because it really hits the light nice, where if you were to have it like as a normal map, it would just be a lot flatter and you wouldn't kind of get this nice sort of flow on this silhouette. So that's a good touch. And I think if you're removing the faces on the back sections of these, I think it's pretty solid to keep. And that's another thing, like to save on, and one thing I've noticed with mentoring artists is sometimes, for example, they would have an asset like this and they would have like this stick section, sort of just like a long geometry mesh that just sits here, and then it would have like this metal bolt that kind of just sits on top, and that's fine. But what people don't realize is that if you have this long section here, it's actually going to take up more UV space and lessen the resolution of the mesh. So what I always say to people is, if you're going to do this, make sure that you have this as one mesh, just slightly sitting on top of this. This is another mesh, and then this is another mesh, because that opens you to 3 options. The first option is you can maximize the resolution over UVs because it doesn't take up as much space. The second thing is it allows you to, for example, you could look at this mesh here and this mesh here and think, okay, well, if the detail on this is the same as here, then you could basically unwrap this, bake it down, move it down, and adjust it to match here, only if that is the case. And then just the same here with this section here, you could go in and basically do that as well. You could basically mirror this if it's mirroring detail. And otherwise, yeah, I mean, it looks really, really good. Again, just I would be careful with your choice count and just try and remove edge loops that don't affect the silhouette. Because it just would show clients or studios that you can optimize your geometry for games as well as create high realistic art. And again, here as well, it's just, the quality is there, everything's really, really nice. But again, there's just a lot of additional edge loops that don't need to be there. So you could strip this one, you could strip this one, keep the center one. Do the same on the top, same on the side here, because this isn't affecting the silhouette at all. It's just there, which it'll just add to your choice count, and you can save on that. And then the ends here are very dense as well. You could literally just delete this face, cap it, and then just connect your vertices and just cheapen this up like way more. Same with your wheels. Do the exact same, because again, there's just a lot of additional geometry that doesn't need to be here, and that geometry won't affect the normal or smoothing of that mesh. And again, for wheels, as just another kind of like sidestep note, is when you're doing the UVs, always remember that if the player is not seeing two sides of a mesh at once, you can basically mirror the left side with the right side. So for example, this side of the wheel, you could do the UVs for, and then you could just like pop it over, flip it over, weld it, and then bake. And if you weld before you bake, that means you avoid any seams, but it means you're only paying for one UV island for both sides, which means you're saving on resolution. So just a side note. And then, yeah, but otherwise, this is awesome. Honestly, keep up the great work. So the next one's just like an environment I came across, and just honestly for a rookie, this is really high level. I mean, I can see that the assets individually could use a bit more spit and polish and love, but otherwise, it's there. It's really, really there. And I can see there's a lot of really nice detail on the lamp, on the light. You got like the text, which is nice and realistic. You got like this. It feels so grounded and just feels really, really good. The one thing I would always say, and the one thing I've learned kind of doing this stuff myself, is if you're doing assets, just any parts that are connecting. I mean, this isn't really a good example, but any parts that are connecting on a mesh, try to add like a little bit of dirt or dust between them, because it just helps to kind of marry the whole mesh together. Just a lot of those little subtle things, because otherwise sometimes things can feel like they're floating on top, which it's not really nice. But honestly, yeah, like this is really high level. Like I seen this and I was just like, wow. I think the only thing that stood out to me is this asset here. So I feel like the edges are very, very sharp on this, especially this section here. So if I was to approach this in a high poly, I would probably give these edges a bit more of inflation, or just push them a bit more into the S Max. So it means when you do a normal matte bake, you just get like a nice kind of soft edge, and it just looks a lot nicer from a distance as well. Because you always have to remember, the sharper your edges are, the further you are from an object, the more it's going to start to ail us on screen, and that's very important to remember. But otherwise, I mean, again, this environment looks awesome. And I think a lot of this edge detail on the table as well, and it's just a lot of storytelling to it. You can see that it's been used over like a long period of time, and it's just been like, a lot of these objects on top of it. And then the same with like the edge wire on this, it just looks really, really nice. And even the detail on the front on the screen, like I think it's always important. You're building an environment to tell a story in any way you can, even if it's just simple stuff as like putting something here, writing something on this, just anything to kind of sell that idea. For example, this is a wonderful idea where you basically have like a board and you've all like these cutouts from newspapers. This is a really awesome way to sell a scene. And again, the texture work in here is really, really nice as well. I can see that the reflections and PBR values on these metal sections read really well. Same with the wood grain on the exterior and interior section of this. I guess the curious question I would have for the person is, is this all geometry or is there an alpha map? Just remember that if you have overlapping alphas, it's a lot more expensive for the engine to render. So you could either bake all this down just as a texture or a decal and just have it placed on top of this, which is probably the most optimal way of doing it. Or B, just have it as geometry if you want to have some of this stuff sitting in front of others, like to hit the light and stuff better. And again, just really, really nice, like the lighting and everything, like the presentation, it reads really, really well. And it definitely reminds me of Phasmophobia. I could play that a lot, so it definitely, I knew by looking at this straight away where it was from. And you can see the panels, which are really, really nice. Just the walls, everything looks really good. And one thing I would say is, if this truck has been used for quite a period of time for different like missions and stuff, you would think that maybe there's some wear and tear and aging in it. So I would say, for example, like this, like the wall panels could have some slight coloration so it wouldn't be all flat gray. It'd be just subtle details. Dust in the corners, up around the corners of the ceiling, just this section here. Maybe just like, I don't know, maybe like an empty can, like Coke can or whatever. Some edgeware detail in this section. You have it around the table, which is really nice. And just again for here, it's like this material kind of stood out to me where it reads really well, but you would think that from usage on this, there would be like just slight dust speckles or fingerprints. I think it's when you're creating the stuff, it's always important to remember that stuff. Just to think like, oh, has this object been used for a long period of time, and look at references and kind of just study the material definition and how it reads in the real world and see if there is any of those slight details in terms of fingerprints and dust specks. It just helps to sell it much better in 3D. And yeah, I mean, everything else in this looks pretty great. And I can see here again, you basically use that approach for the keyboard. So there's general aging on the keys. So it's like a darker kind of like the plastic has all aged. And same with the computer case. So I would kind of take that approach and just sort of apply it anywhere else you see fit. So like, okay, so you have kind of this coloration. So maybe the printer can have some coloration to it, and then maybe you can add it to the wall section. Just anything that makes it feel like more lived in. And then the next one I have is this, which is honestly it stood out to me. I thought, wow, this looks really, really good, especially for a rookie. Like, it tells me straight away that your modeling skills are really up there and you know how to use the 3D package, which honestly is wonderful. I think when I looked at this, I thought it looks really cool in the purple, like the purple blue. But what I might have done if I was to approach this would to give it some material definition and change where, you could keep the bottom as a purple, but maybe change the color in the top of the hood, or maybe add more seams. So like there's a seam kind of traveling here, and maybe this section here is different to the rest. Like maybe there's different details or just different coloration. Same with these guys. If these are being used to propulse the vehicle up, you would think that there'd be a lot of dirt gathering around these guys and maybe just general like aging from the heat coming out of it. So it's just always important to think of those details. For example, you have that kind of presenting here from the heat of the metal section, so you could apply it more on these guys here. Maybe some dust gathering around the lights, around the front hood area. Yeah, like that's probably what I would have done if I was doing it. And just sort of like same again around the back section, just kind of dust it up, add more dirt around the pumps. Maybe sell an idea here where it's like, okay, these have been maintained, so give like a date and time or just something that kind of indicates it. Again, I think it's always important to kind of just like tell a story with your piece. So if it's just something as simple as that, or just anything else that you can add to just sell the idea. Same as under here, just add more dirt and dust. Just coloration, because you have to think like if this thing's being propulsed, there's going to be a lot of heat radiating from here. So it's going to really kind of capture the details that you have down here. And again, yeah, same here. I mean, you have all these nice scratches and dents, but I would go in and probably just add a bit more definition, maybe like slightly darker colors in this section, maybe some dirt. It's very silver and silver and silver, the same as like it's purple and purple. Just try and bring in and introduce just a bit more color variation, so it kind of just certain parts of it pop more than others. Yeah, otherwise honestly solid. And I have to say, like, all the work I've seen today on the rookies is just it's really been high quality. Yeah, I mean, if these people, like these students, really implement the right approaches to these things and kind of learn just sort of how to tell those little things and to optimize their art, it'll really kind of shine through when they send out applications. And I mean, for example, if you go onto ArtStation, that's a good platform to really get inspiration and to kind of just see the competition and kind of see like, okay, so what is the quality that's being hired. And one thing I always say to people is, if there is a studio that you want to work for and you're making assets and you're thinking, oh, I would love to work in Call of Duty or any other project, just pop into the game, have a look at the assets that exist in the engine, compare it to your stuff and think, okay, am I close? Is there anything maybe I'm missing? Are they texturing things in a certain way? Just really try and riff off that to get your stuff up to that quality bar. And the other thing I would add is, if there's a studio that you want to work for, make sure that you tailor your portfolio. Like, most importantly, tailor your portfolio to your strengths. So for example, if your strength is creating realism, don't put stylized stuff in it. Always put your best work, but also make sure that your portfolio tailors to the studio that you want to apply for. So if you want to apply for Blizzard, make sure there's a lot of stylized art in your portfolio, and it really kind of hits home with the art style they go for Overwatch and World of Warcraft. If you want to work in Call of Duty, make sure there's a lot of realistic art in there. That's when I always said, people is like, art directors don't have a lot of time to go through portfolios because they have so much to manage that usually it's like, okay, we need to hire X, Y, and Z. They'll bam through portfolios, and if anything kind of hits home on the quality bar and such, they'll pull that out and be like, okay, interview. So just always make sure that your work is kind of tailored towards their needs and their art style. Yeah, that's it. I think Alan's coming back on. No, he's not. Yeah, if you guys have any other questions or such in the meantime, feel free to shoot them out and I can answer them. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, the art I've seen here is it's wonderful. Like, it's really, really up there. It's high quality stuff. Okay, well, that wraps it up for today. Thanks so much for tuning in, and if you guys have any questions or anything, you can always hit me up over my website, which is prettyart.xyz. And yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day.